Welcome back to Narrow Path Doctrine. My name is Jim. Just want to apologize off the top if you happen to hear any noises behind me or anything. I have the window open. It's been about 8 billion degrees here lately. It was funny. Yesterday was probably the warmest day, and the power went out for about 13 hours. So that was great. No fans or anything. Awesome. Anyway, I want to talk to you today about man's will versus God's will. I just did a video on Arminianism not being the gospel, and this kind of ties in with that. Now, a lot of people say they make the decision for Christ. Their will chooses over God's will. God is powerless to really do anything until they accept Christ, and then when they accept Christ, then God can save them. But until then, God cannot override their will, their free will, as they call it. Now, this is not about salvation. This is about man's will versus God's will, and a clear indication that God trumps man's will. And this is from the Bible. This is scripture. This isn't Jim's opinion here. This is from the Bible, okay? We'll read through the passage first of all, and then I kind of want to break the passage down a little bit to get into more details. The passage in question is 2 Chronicles 18:31, and it says, "And it came to pass, when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, that they said, It is the king of Israel. Therefore they compassed about him to fight, but Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him, and God moved them to depart from him." Now, it's pretty easy to see in the second half of that verse that God is pretty active here. The account takes place during a joint military campaign between King Jehoshaphat of Judah and King Ahab of Israel as they go up to battle against Ramoth Gilead, which was under Syrian control. Jehoshaphat, though a godly and reforming king, made an unwise alliance with Ahab, who was a notoriously wicked ruler. The compromise leads to a rebuke later by the prophet Jehu in 2 Chronicles 19:2 that says, "Shouldest thou help the ungodly and love them that hate the Lord? Therefore is wrath upon thee from before the Lord." Now, before entering the battle, Ahab consults his false prophets who flatter him with a promise of victory. But the true prophet, Micaiah, boldly declares the truth. He says that Ahab will perish. Now, God reveals that he has sent a lying spirit into the mouths of Ahab's prophets to accomplish his judgment in 2 Chronicles 18:22, where we read, "Now therefore, behold, the Lord hath put a lying spirit in the mouth of these prophets, and the Lord hath spoken evil against thee." This demonstrates God's sovereignty over even the deception of the wicked. Ahab then attempts to thwart the prophecy by disguising himself in battle, while Jehoshaphat goes into the fight openly, clothed in royal robes. Now, as we read in our verse here, it says, "They said, It is the king of Israel. Therefore they compassed about him to fight." The Syrian captains, under orders to kill only the king of Israel, we see that in verse 30 before this one, mistakenly believe Jehoshaphat is Ahab and surround him to kill him. And as we continue to read, it says, "But Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him, and God moved them to depart from him." This is a moment of divine intervention. Jehoshaphat cries out, likely both vocally to his men that were there and prayerfully to God, and God answers immediately. The soldiers, though convinced that they had found their target and they were ready to kill him, they are supernaturally redirected. The key phrase here is God moved them to depart from him. The Hebrew word for moved, I'll put it on the screen, it means to turn or to cause to depart. This is not passive allowance. It is an active divine influence on their minds, and more importantly in our study here today, an active divine influence on their wills. Many insist that God does not interfere with human will, claiming man's choices are entirely autonomous and even trump God's will. I've heard that from many professing Christians. However, this passage here clearly defines that that is simply not true. The Syrian soldiers were determined to kill the king of Israel. They thought they had found their target. Their minds were set, but when the Lord willed otherwise, he caused them to change their course. Their intention was overridden by divine power. We're reminded in Proverbs 21:1 that the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord as the rivers of water. He turneth it whithersoever he will. This is not coercion, but divine governance. God can and does turn the hearts of men according to his will, especially in salvation. Mainly in salvation. Now, we see mercy to Jehoshaphat. Though he had made a sinful alliance, he belonged to the Lord. When he cried out, the Lord helped him, not because of his merit, but because of God's covenant faithfulness. We see judgment on Ahab here as well. In contrast, Ahab is mortally wounded by what appears to be a random arrow. There's nothing random in this world. Verse 33 tells us this, but it was divinely guided. God's will was fulfilled exactly as he had declared through his prophet. In 2 Chronicles 18:33 we read, and a certain man drew a bow at a venture and smote the king of Israel between the joints of the harness. Therefore he said to his chariot man, turn thine hand that thou mayest carry me out of the host, for I am wounded. What seemed like a chance was in fact divine precision. That arrow from a distance came through, and it says harness in the KJV, but basically it means armor, and between the armor, and ended up killing King Ahab. This account makes clear that God governs not only outcomes, but the very inclinations of human will. The Syrians were not persuaded by natural reasoning or new information. God moved them. John Calvin said, God, who holds all men by his secret reign, bends and moves their hearts according to his pleasure. This is biblical sovereignty, not a God who reacts to man, but a God who ordains, governs, and accomplishes his will through and even upon men. So for the believer, even when we stumble, God's mercy remains. If we are his, he will preserve us, even from our own foolish alliances or dumb actions in this life. When Jehoshaphat cried out, the Lord delivered him. And for the wicked, well, no deception or disguise can evade God's judgment. Ahab attempted to avoid death by hiding, but God's will found him exactly as prophesied. So in conclusion, 2 Chronicles 18:31 is a shining example of God's sovereign intervention in the human will. It demonstrates that man's intentions, no matter how firm, can be turned in an instant by divine command. This verse stands as a firm refutation of the belief that God never interferes in man's decisions. God not only intervenes, he orders and accomplishes all things according to the counsel of his own will. Psalm 115:3 says, but our God is in the heavens, he hath done whatsoever he hath pleased. All right, thank you so much for joining me here today. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up, share it with others, and if you haven't subscribed, please do so and click the notification bell to get updates when new videos like this one come out. So until next time, remember, true doctrine fuels a living, breathing faith. God bless.
Through the firestorm, I'll hold on tight. With you guiding me, I'll find the light. With the Lord, I'm winning every fight. The road is twisted, pain in the air.